Okay, it is exactly 6, and we are racing right into it because we have an abbreviated session tonight. Chanukah Sameach, everybody. Abbreviated because we're joining in a kind of a national communal. That is the community that we're in with 7 synagogues. We're joining with them at 6:30 to do a candle lighting, and I hope you join us for that. We'll go straight from this to that. But I didn't want to overlap with that programming, and we thought, oh, should we cancel tonight? And then I thought, no, I really, really want to do a Ma'oz Sur because our topic in this class is poetry, and usually our topic is biblical poetry, but it is worth our time, and actually I'm thinking towards next year, maybe doing some more of this, worth our time looking at the massive genre that was inspired by biblical poetry, which is the genre of piyutim. Piyut comes from the Greek word, which is related to the word for poet. It comes from the Greek word, right? So that's already like a reflection point for Hanukkah. And it's essentially religious poetry. And it develops in Jewish tradition already in the 4th, 5th centuries. But by the time we get to the Middle Ages, I think it's fair to say that the piyut was the primary artistic expression, mode of artistic expression of Jewish civilization. Now, you might say, well, what about music? Remember, Jewish tradition famously not so visual in its artistic product. Well, music was there too, but music is saying that is like referencing piyut anyway, because these piyutim, these poems, religious poems, were meant to be sung, and the words would be fixed, but there would be tunes that would sort of change depending on where you were at. And one of the great joys of my most recent stay in Israel was I did a program of study of piyutim, and it's just amazing the way that we all have these words like lechadodi, that's a piyut, but the melody changes, so you could hear lechadodi in like an Indian melody and a Yemenite melody, a Moroccan melody, a Eastern European melody, etc. So so we're going to look at a piyut tonight. Speaking of Yemen, I should say maybe the greatest composer of piyutim is Shalom Shabazi, who doesn't get a lot of airplay in kind of the conversation about like the great scholars, partially because he was from Yemen and there's like not as much focus on that, even though it's thought to be one of the most continuous and authentic bearers of the tradition, but partially because he wrote piyutim poems instead of legal literature. But Shalom Shabazi was truly one of the greats of Jewish history, and we've referenced Shakespeare before, but he is sometimes called by academics the Shakespeare of Yemen because he was his powers of composition were so astounding. We, I think, tonight are going to look at maybe the most famous piyut, or if not the most famous piyut, I think the piyut most classically associated with a holiday. Now, of course, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are replete with piyutim, famous ones, but like it's not, it depends where you're at, which ones you'll hear. But on Hanukkah, you're gonna hear Ma'oz Tzur. It's almost an assumption that you will recite the 2 blessings and maybe the declaration Hanero Talalo, these candles are holy, and then most people head into Ma'oz Tzur. And Ma'oz Tzur, and it's in most Sidurim. And then most people say, as I usually do, sing the first verse and then just start mumbling and trail off or finish right there, because it's actually a very, very difficult poem. The language is extremely, there's all sorts of strange verbs in here, but they're incredibly, you can see the skill of composition. You can just see how well the rhymes are so good, and the syncopation is so good. It's a joy to sing and a joy to read. We'll sing we heard a version of this coming in, but we'll sing the classic tune tonight, which is I say classic. They're, classic since it was borrowed from German folk tradition, right? And probably originates outside of our tradition, but is the classic tune. I read a little bit about it on Wikipedia where the tune comes from, and apparently they know. So go look if you want that. But as we've seen a couple of times before in this class, it's like this incredible poem, incredibly well conceived, and yet it's kind of horrifying. It's really intense, and it actually in some ways is falling out of favor because some of the lines are so violent, just straight up violent. Now, we've done this before, as I said, in this gathering. We've kind of tackled like what is the biblical author doing when the poetry is so triumphant and so violent, and is it more complicated than that, or is it just triumphalism? Is it just rage? And on some level, we can have a kind of a basic sympathy for a people that has been oppressed, and these are their forms of emoting, of responding, of releasing anger. I will, on that note, significantly mention that this poem was composed in the 13th century during the Crusades, right? So we can be a little bit more understanding of language that we would not be happy to see, coming out of our own rabbis' mouths. But it is more complicated than that, I think, as these things almost always are. So I hope by the time we get to the end of it, first of all, we're going to see the structure of the poem, which probably many of you have noticed before, but we're going to really try and track it, like what's actually going on in Ma'oz Tzur. And then hopefully by the end, we'll understand that there is not just the text, but the subtext of what's going on. Okay, and we're going to try and get out of here by 6:30. So let's dive in. Here is your source sheet. And boy, I have to tell you, it is so hard in general to stack up the, oh, that's not your source sheet, hold on. It's so hard in general to stack up the, let's see if this works. I tried to get, now I also want to have transliteration so we could sing it together. But it's so hard to get the lines right. I fiddled around with it for a while in Safari, and I think I figured it out. So hopefully that'll be useful. But in any case, as I always do, I'll screen share. So I'm going to start doing that now. Any questions before I begin? I'm a little bit racing tonight, and we'll have a little less discussion just because of the confines of the time. But any questions? Good. Okay, so let's go. So let's sing the first verse together, just to remind us. And we'll sort of take just the first verse. And the transliteration I put down here and here, I'm going to go to my version. The transliteration I put down here, and then we'll go and we'll look a little bit at this opening verse. So the tune, which many of you know, and you can sing along with me. You'll be muted, but you'll hear both me and you. So that'll be a little bit of a chorus there. But here's the tune. Ma'oz Tzur Yeshuati Lecha Na'el Leshabeach Tikon Betefilati V'sham Toda Nizabeach Letachin Matbeach Mitzor Hamnabeach Az Egmor B'shir Mizmor Chanukat HaMizbeach, and we repeat the last line. Az Egmor B'shir Mizmor Chanukat HaMizbeach. Okay, as we've learned in biblical poetry, it's often the first line or first verses, first stanza in this case, which will tell us a lot about where we're going. So let's look at the first verse here. Ma'oz Tzur, my stronghold, or Ma'oz is like a stronghold or a fortress. Tzur Yeshuasi, the rock of my salvation, to you one must give praise. Now, the first question I want to ask you is, what is that stronghold? What's the fortress there? Let my house of prayer be restored, and I will bring an offering of thanks. And now here's where things get ugly. when you ready the slaughter of the blaspheming oppressor, that's the word, matbeach, like related to tavach, like the slaughter. When you ready the slaughter of the blaspheming oppressor, then I will complete with song and poetry the dedication of the altar. And dedication or inauguration, the word for that is Chanukah. So we have the obvious play there, but it's also the word used to inaugurate a new building like the temple, right? So, or to inaugurate or to dedicate the altar. Okay, so first question, what's the Ma'oz Sur Yeshuati? What is that? What do we think that, what's the stronghold?
I mean, there's a nod to Beth Zur.
Correct. That's right. Part of it is a technical reference to Beit Zur, which was an actual holdout for the Hashmonaim. So very good, Yonatan. That's right. Anything else that this is evoking? Ma'oz Zur, the rock of my salvation. Is it really about Beit Zur, that city? Michal?
It reminds me of Masada.
Good. Like the last stronghold, the last fortress there.
Of Zealots, the last fortress stronghold of, sort of the lunatic fringe.
Good. Okay. All right. Fair enough. So the battle is, you're there. You're like, it's a suicide mission. You run up to the top of the hill and stay there. Yael, what do you think?
Well, I think it's God.
Good.
I think God is the rock of our salvation.
Good. That's right as well. God is often referred to as Tsuri or Tsur Yeshuati, the rock of my. So it's God, it's these places, and among those places, I would also suggest it's the temple itself, right? Once the fortress, the rock upon which the altar is placed. So bring me back to inaugurate the temple, and I will inaugurate the temple. Now there is violence in here. There is something aggressive in here. But what else do we find here? Like there's praise of God, and there's violence towards the enemy. Is there anything else we want to note, just sort of in terms of themes that are being set here? One gives praise to God. I will give praise to God. You should kill our enemies. And anything else? Anybody want to?
And then we'll have a party.
And then we'll have a party. That's right. Who said that?
I did.
It's right. Then we'll have a party. Now, what I want to, that's a very like lighthearted version of it. But actually, the thing that I want to focus on here, which Esra is actually tuning into, is then we will. I will praise you, right? Az egmor. In that time, I'll finally finish my praises of you. So keep that in mind, because there is something that is yet to happen, something that is not fulfilled. Hanukkah celebrates the inauguration of the temple, so it's already done. And yet the opening verse here speaks of something that's not quite done. And that's a clue for us. Okay. Now, as I said, I'm sure many of you have caught this before, but it's also not so easy to catch. So we're going to now move through the stanzas of the poem and think about what's going on in each of those stanzas. And the reason that we have to do a little thinking is because where's Hanukkah? Well, Hanukkah is down here in the fifth verse. Fifth verse. The Greeks gathered against me back in the days of the Chazmonians. Yavanim nikbetzu alai, azai bimei Hashmanaim. They broke through the walls of my towers and defiled all the oils. Ufartzu chomot migdalai v'timu kol hashmanim. But from the last remaining flasks, a miracle was wrought for your lovely lilies. And that's my translation, but like it's la shoshanim, right? So and that's a reference, as Piyutim is wont to do, to use biblical material and to hint to you, like, if you know this reference, then you know what I'm talking about. That's part of the artistry. So when you say Shoshanim, you're talking about God's love for us, God's little lilies, God's little roses, right? And so the wise ones set these 8 days for song and praise. Okay? So that's nice. That's Hanukkah. And that's why we're singing this. But it's 5 verses in. So let's go, and we had an opening verse, right? So we have 1 and we have 5. Let's go back to number 2 and figure out what we're saying here. And to tell you the truth, if we had more time, part of the fun would be to guess what we were talking about, but we're going to spell it out a little bit more because we're moving fast tonight. But I also really want you to listen to the language here, because it's actually in the second stanza where you start to understand what I would call the subtext. Something else is going on. So just listen to the opening words here. Ra'ot sava nafshi b'yagon kochi kila. My soul was filled with torments. My strength was spent with sorrow. Chayai maru b'koshi b'shibud malchut egla. They embittered my life with toil during the enslavement to the kingdom of the heifer. Here's a real, I would never have caught this, but apparently it's from Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says, Mitzrayim egla yafeh, right? I mean, Egypt is a beautiful, a handsome heifer, is the way I love that phrase. Like, it's like a bar that I would like to go to, the handsome heifer. But Egypt is referred to as the kingdom of the heifer. So we know what we're talking about here, the Egyptians. But God with a mighty hand took out the treasured nation. And I must say, by the way, the translation that I saw was not the treasured nation, but the sacred race, which is like, oh my God. First of all, it does not say that, but it's almost like the ugly elements of Ma'oz Tzur, the translator making way worse, okay? But Am Segula, the treasured nation, Chel Paro v'chol zaro yardu ke'even bimtsula. All right, and the army of Pharaoh and all his seeds sank like a stone into the deep. Aside from the language just being beautiful, mostly we just tell the story of Egypt. Okay, that's, again, not so surprising. Although, as I asked you to, I want us to think about the intensity of that language. My soul was filled with torments. My strength was spent with sorrow. They embittered my life with toil. And then God saved us. Great, it's over. And it should be over, but not so fast. The next stanza then, this is, okay, now we're there. Dvir kodsho heviani, v'gam sham lo shakatati. And this is another critical line. God brought me to God's holy shrine. Again, what is that? Probably the temple. Israel? I don't know. God brought me to God's holy shrine, but even there I found no quiet. Uvano noges vehiglani, kizarim avadati. For the oppressor came and exiled me, for I had served strange gods. V'yayin al masachti kimat she'avarti. I drank the poisoned wine and almost passed away. And this is one of the great lines. Ketz Bavel, Zerubbabel, leketz shivim, the ketz shivim noshati. As Babylon's end drew near, Zerubbabel came. In the Hebrew, it's just end of Babylon, Zerubbabel, and I was saved after 70 years. After 70 years, I was saved. Okay, this is in some ways, I think, the critical turn in the poem. What happened here? Right? God is great and God needs to be praised. And once upon a time, we really suffered, but God saved us, hooray. And then what? Anybody want to just narrate the kind of, there's a disruption now in this poem. What happened here?
We were in the land of Israel and we worshipped false gods, so God launched the Babylonian exile.
Good. The story's over. God saved us from Egypt. We got to Israel. Hooray, the end. But not the end. Not the end at all. Even there, lo shakatsti, I had no quiet there. Partially because it's my fault, because I worshipped strange gods and then I was eventually taken away. But you can hear, oh my gosh, we suffered so much. And then we finally got there and it didn't end. And we were exiled from the land. Okay, fine. But then we went back, right? Leketz shivim noshati. We went back at the end of 70 years and we were saved. Finally, the story is over. We finally were redeemed, but not so fast. The Agagite, the son of Hemdata, sought to cut down the lofty cypress. The lofty cypress is a reference from the Talmud. Karot komat barosh bikesh Agagi ben Hemdata. But his design became a snare to himself, and his pride was put to rest. V'niyata lo lepach ulemokesh v'gavato nishbata. You raise the head of the Benjamite, that's Mordechai. You erase the name of the enemy. Rosh Yamini Niseta V'oyev Shmo Machita. And all of his sons and all of his stuff you hung upon the gallows. Rov Banav V'kim Yanav Al Ha'etz Talita. Okay, well, I'm not going to ask you what holiday this is a reference to, but you can start to say, what do we have? Egypt, Babylon, Madai or Persia, Media or Persia, right? The Purim story. And okay, we went back to our Holy Land, but some of us are still back there in Babylon, and we're still being tormented by the Babylon, by the Persians, right? New kingdom. And that's the point. That's the point. There's every one of these stanzas, one kingdom after another. Okay. Then we have the Greeks, right? And that's it. And so, in other words, the story is we were brought back, but back in Babylon, a new kingdom arose and oppressed us. And when we went back to Israel, a kingdom arose there and oppressed us. There's no escape. Like, we can't stop. We can never get away from this tormenting, right? And then there's one more verse, okay? And this is really critical. This is really like, it's the last verse, which is really like the point of it all. Even though we're singing this for the fifth verse. Okay, but let's take a look. Chasof zora kodshecha v'karev ketz hayeshua. So bear your holy arm, right? Like the Yad HaGadolah. So like unleash your arm and hasten the final salvation. Nakom nikmat dam avadecha me'umah harasha. Avenge your servant's blood from the wicked nation. Now, again, very violent, very aggressive, but who is the wicked nation? And this, honestly, folks, I think this is the line. This is the line that for me unlocks the whole poem. Ki archa lanu hasha'a ve'ein ketz limei hara'ah. For the hour has grown so long, and there is no end to the days of evil. We're still here. We're still suffering. Push Admon, Deche Admon, Betzel Tzalmon into the darkest shadows and establish for us the 7 shepherds. Another reference, Micah, the prophet Micah says, we shall raise against him 7 shepherds and 8 princes of men. Now, who is this? Who is the wicked nation? Who is Admon, the red one?
Bnei Esav.
Bnei Esav. Why do you say that, Yael?
Ki hu Adam Dam.
Yes,
Because he's red.
right. They called him Edom. They called Esav Edom because he ate that red stuff. Adom Hazeh. And Esau is the progenitor to, we're really racing here, a lot of Jewish history. Esau is the progenitor biblically to Edom, the Edomites. And the Edomites are seen as a progenitor to who?
Rome.
To Rome. That's right. To Rome. To Rome. And Rome is, after all, the nation that the rabbis were conquered by. And Rome, as far as the 13th century is concerned, and maybe as far as we're concerned, so it depends on how Zionist you are, Rome threw us into the exile that has lasted for thousands of years. Oh, we suffered in Egypt, we got out, they kept torturing us. And then we came back to Israel, they kept torturing us, they kept torturing us. And then the Romans came and exiled us once again, and we have not gotten back from that. Right? We have not gotten back from that. Now, I want to show you one more thing, just to give you a sense of what just happened. We took a tour through what's known as, and this is a classical trope, and that's what I want to show you, what's known as the 4 kingdoms. The 4 kingdoms. And the kingdoms are Egypt, Parasu Madai, Persia, Media, Egypt, Babylon, Parasu Madai, and Greece, Those are the four, but then there's a fifth kingdom, right? And the fifth kingdom is Rome. And that, as the rabbis write about Rome, what they're talking about is the exile that they're in. And I want to show you just like the way this pops up in another classical source. Here's a midrash on the very opening verses of Genesis. And those very opening verses are V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vo, and the earth was chaos and void. V'choshech al pnei tahom, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. V'ruach Elohim merachefet al pnei hamayim, and the spirit of God hovered above the waters. So Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish interpreted these verses according to the kingdoms of exile. The earth was chaos, that's the exile of Babylon. And void, that's the exile of Persia. And darkness, that's the exile of Greece, on the face of the deep. And now this is the wicked kingdom whose power cannot be measured, just as the great deep cannot be plumbed. In other words, and then the Spirit of God is our final redemption, the Messianic King. In other words, what Rome represented to them was the ultimate exile, the one they were in, the one that had lasted for hundreds of years, the one that made it seem like actually maybe we're never going to be redeemed. Though we have been again and again and again and again, we're not now. Ki archa hasha, and the hour is getting long here. How long has it been? Right? So the subtext here, and I'm seeing I only have a few minutes left, so I'll just speak it out. The subtext, I think you've been picking up, is that, you know, we're going to slaughter these people, we're going to rage against these nations, we're going to have our revenge, we're going to fight back, we're going to be powerful, but really we're not, and it's your fault, God. Where's our salvation? Listen, we've done some bad things along the way, but when are you going to, because I will praise you in your holy abode, in your ma'oz tzur, when you bring me back there, but I'm just waiting. Okay? So that is as much as we can do tonight. I included the original source of the idea of the four kingdoms, and you can see there's like 4 or 5 depending on how you're counting. That comes actually from the book of Daniel and one of the visions of Daniel. That's really where it comes from, so you can read it on your source. But come on, we have to sing our way out. So let's sing together Ma'oz Tzur. And now that we have the verses, we'll do our best with these very, very complicated words to actually just sing the whole thing. So let's try and do that together. I wish we could all unmute, but you know, I'll have to settle for just my voice and please accompany me in your homes. So let's do it. Ma'oz tzur yeshuati lechana leshabeach tikon betefilati v'sham toda nizabeach letachin matbeach mitzoram nabeach az egmor b'shir mizmor Chanukat HaMizbeach, az egmor b'shir mizmor, Chanukat HaMizbeach, ra'ot sava nafshi, be'yagon kochi kila, chayai mareru bekoshi, b'shibud malchut egla, וידו הגדולה הוציא את הסגולה חיל פרעה וכל זרעו ירדו כאבן במצולה חיל פרעה וכל זרעו ירדו כאבן במצולה דביר קדשו הביאני וגם שם לא שקטתי ובנוגס והגלני, כי זרים עברתי, ואין רעל מסכתי, כמעט שעבדתי, קץ בבל זרובבל, לקץ 70 נושעתי, קץ בבל זרובבל, לקץ 70 נושעתי, karot omad berosh, bikesh agagi ben hamdata, v'niata lo lepachu lemokesh, v'gavato nishbata, rosh yemini niseita, ve'oyev shmo machita, rov banav v'kinyanav, al ha'etz talita, rov banav v'kinyanav, al ha'etz talita, Yavanim nikbetzu alai, azai bimei chashmanim, ufartzu chomot migdalai, v'timu kol hashmanim, uminotar kankanim, nasa nes lashoshanim, b'nevina yemei shmona, kavu shirunanim, b'nevina yemei shmona, kavu shirunanim, chasov zroa kodshecha, v'karev ketzai shua, nekom nikma dam avadecha, me'uma harsha, ki archa lanu hasha, v'ein ketz li mehara, Dechei admon betzel tzalmon, hakem lanu roe shiva, Dechei admon betzel tzalmon, hakem lanu roe shiva. All right, I think that is it. That's our time. It really it comes alive when you sing it. So really, the words are so beautiful. There's more to investigate there, but we'll leave it for now. Please join me in jumping if you need a candle lighting, jumping to our program that we're doing with these other shuls for candle lighting together. We will join again in January. We're going to take 2 weeks off our biblical poetry class and join again in January, Wednesday, first week of January. I'll see you there. Love to you all. Happy Hanukkah.